Hey everybody, John with Vinely here, and this 5 on Friday is going to be a little bit different. Typically a 5 on Friday will be us choosing one album and then telling you five interesting or not things about that album, five facts about that album. Today we're going to do a countdown. Top five, my top five, movie soundtrack albums. I would love to know what you think. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreement with my list. You might hate everything on my list. You might think there's some things that should be added or subtracted. Let me know in the comments what your top five movie soundtracks would be. But a couple of ground rules first. We're talking about soundtracks, not scores, right? Whereas a score would be music that is created for a film, a soundtrack is a collection of songs that are included in the film. And we're talking about movie soundtracks only, not Broadway, not television. So, top five movie soundtrack albums. 5 on Friday. Here we go. Number five. Not only a great soundtrack, but also a really good movie. 1989's When Harry Met Sally. I have probably listened to the soundtrack to this movie even more times than I've seen it, and I love the movie. It's funny, touching, romantic if you're into that sort of thing, and the soundtrack is Harry Connick Jr. singing American standards, the Great American Songbook. Tracks like It Had to Be You, Don't Get Around Much Anymore, Autumn in New York, I Could Write a Book. If you're not familiar with these, go check it out. Really, really solid. It definitely sets a mood for the film, and they work really well together, obviously. So, my number five is the soundtrack to When Harry Met Sally. Number four. This one I had to debate a little bit in my mind. But Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 came out on top. I was debating between Volume 2 and Volume 1 because they are both great soundtracks. But Volume 2 is just next level. Guardians of the Galaxy, of course, came out in 2017, the Marvel movie. And I've seen the movie a few times, but I've definitely listened to the soundtrack and some of the songs on the soundtrack a lot more than I've watched the film. Songs on this soundtrack, it runs the gamut. You've got Mr. Blue Sky by ELO, Fox on the Run by The Sweet, The Chain by Fleetwood Mac, Southern Nights by Glenn Campbell. I mean, it's all over the place, and it's awesome. A few more songs, Wham Bam, Shang-a-Lang by Silver. Where else are you going to hear that song? Flashlight by Parliament. That's on here. So if you're in the mood for just some good time, classic, mostly 70s rock, you can't go wrong with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, really, or Volume 1. But we're not going to do that. We're going to stick with number 2. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is my number 4 soundtrack. Number 3. For number 3, I went with the 1992 grunge classic film, Singles. Singles it meant a lot to me at the time when I watched it for the first time, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. But I think it still holds together today because it's just about young people trying to find their way in the world, and at the same time trying to stay true to themselves. Maybe I put too much thought into this. I don't know. But the soundtrack to this movie is a snapshot of Seattle grunge sound from the early 90s. On the soundtrack, you've got Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Chris Cornell, Paul Westerberg, The Lovemongers, Mother Love Bone. I mean, the list goes on and on. Mudhoney, Screaming Trees, Smashing Pumpkins. It's a fantastic soundtrack. The movie actually meant so much to me that the last time I was in Seattle, I drove to the apartment complex, the filming location where they filmed the exteriors for the apartment complex where some of the characters lived. I'll put some pictures up here. I've got them here somewhere. I'll put them up. But yeah, this was a big movie for me, and the soundtrack even more so because it is just such a classic. Number 3, Singles.
All my life, waiting for somebody. Ah, ha, ha. Oh, yeah. Ah, ha, ha. Ah, ha, ha. Ah, ha, ha. Been down so long, doesn't really matter.
Number 2. My number 2 movie soundtrack of all time is actually from a movie I've maybe only seen once. But you better believe I have listened to these songs, and so have you, over and over and over. And that is the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever. I know, it's disco, it's a little bit dated, which is why I probably have only seen the movie once and haven't watched it in a long, long time. But the music holds up. I mean, it's Bee Gees primarily on the soundtrack. But listen to this track listing. Staying Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, Night Fever, More Than a Woman, If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman. What else we got? Jive Talkin', You Should Be Dancing, Boogie Shoes. We've got Casey and the Sunshine Band. Boogie Shoes on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Such a great, good time, feeling good, get your body moving kind of soundtrack. I mean, unless you truly hate the Bee Gees, which I don't know who could even, I don't know. I love the Bee Gees. When I'm in the mood for that kind of music, they are just perfect. Love them. So that's why this is my number 2 movie soundtrack, because it's almost a Bee Gees greatest hits album. At least from the disco era, it is. Anyway, number 2, Saturday. Let me try that again. Number 2, Saturday Night Fever. If you are interested in framed copies of your favorite album soundtracks, your album art, any of your favorite albums actually, head on over to Vinely.com, VYNYLY.com. Take a look at what we have for sale over there. And if you're looking for something in particular and you don't see it on the website, just drop me a line. I can work it up for you, no problem. Now, before we get to my number 1 movie soundtrack of all time, some of you are probably thinking it's got to be The Wall. But it's not. And I'm going to tell you why. The album The Wall came out in 1979. The movie didn't get released until 1982. So the album stood on its own for a long time before the movie was released. So even though they may have been thinking through this whole process while they were recording the album, I don't think it counts as a soundtrack album because it wasn't really created for that purpose. You know what I mean? Anyway, let's move on. Number 1, The Wall by Pink Floyd. I changed my mind. It's such a classic. I know it's predictable, but I really feel like it does count as the soundtrack to the film, even though a majority of the songs were reworked or re-recorded or tweaked for the film. The film soundtrack, the soundtrack album, was planned for The Wall, but was never released. So the closest thing we have to a soundtrack to that film is the original Wall album. And of course, there's at least one song in the movie that was on, well, there's 2, I guess. There's one that was on Roger Waters' Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, which came out later. And there's a song that was included on the Pink Floyd's follow-up album, The Final Cut. Other than that, though, these songs came from the Wall album. And so I guess they were probably the film and the album and probably the Final Cut as well were all kind of in development mentally at the same time. And I think the Wall album, like I said, is the closest thing we have to a soundtrack to the Wall film, which is groundbreaking, of course. And the songs on the Wall, you can't argue with that. I mean, Comfortably Numb, Hey You, which is not in the film, actually. Maybe, I'm not quite sure what point I'm making here, but The songs on the album are just incredible. And since it goes hand in hand with the film, I'm going to change my mind from earlier and say that number one movie soundtrack of all time, and also possibly the best selling on my list, is The Wall by Pink Floyd. So there it is, your top five, well, my top five movie soundtrack albums of all time for this 5 on Friday. If you have not liked and subscribed, please do. Hit that little notification bell so you get notified when we release more videos, which we do every week. Let me know in the comments what you think about my list and how you might change it. Let me know what your list is. There are so many great movie soundtracks that I could not include on the list. There's too many for a 5, but it's 5 on Friday, so I stay with 5. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and have a great day.